world headquarters of common sense. Talk Radio.
Neither country is perfect, and neither country is entirely composed of villains. Life is never like that,
no.
And to base any kind of political action on a belief that it is like that is almost invariably to make a grave mistake. It's the danger of it all is that you get into a war hysteria, which pushes politicians into doing extremely foolish things. And there's still this pressure being urged, often by Ukrainian ministers and officials themselves, that there should be a no-fly zone over Ukraine, which I think would probably be one of the biggest disasters of modern times if it happens. But it's emotionally appealing, even if it's rationally idiotic. So this characterization of Ukraine as a paradise filled with saints, and Russia as hell itself, populated entirely by screaming demons, makes this sort of argument easier to pursue, that we should rush into actions which we might then regret. Wars are incredibly easy to start and incredibly easy to get into, and fantastically hard to get out of, and people should always bear that in mind before calling for these things.
Yes, I think so. And what do you make of this kind of outpouring? I mean, you expect it at the BAFTA Awards from Benedict Cumberbatch and his ilk, but all this kind of, let's house a Ukrainian refugee kind of business, which it seems to me, and maybe I'm alone in this, but I'm finding it sort of faintly just troubling, because it's all about people saying what they want to do rather than actually doing something, which inevitably could be quite complicated.
Well, sure, but if anybody does take a Ukrainian family in, then God bless them. It's a great thing to do, and if I'm not going to attack anybody for doing that, I think that people need places to go, and if people are able to provide them for them, then that's fantastic. So I won't criticise that. I think there's a certain lack of profound understanding of the issue involved, but that's always the case, isn't it? 6 months ago, I think most people now are putting Ukraine flags in their front gardens or wearing Ukraine badges couldn't have found it on a blank map. And to this day, they probably would be pretty vague about it or what goes on there or how it's governed or anything like that. But that's the way of it. Anybody who sees a country being attacked by a bigger neighbor is naturally going to take the side of the attacked small guy, and that's not unreasonable. It's just not a very good basis for making serious long-term policy.
No, I mean, my argument is not with those who are going to take a refugee into their home. My argument is with all the people who say that they're going to, but who probably inevitably won't, particularly those on the side of sort of celebrity who stand up and wear blue and yellow colours every time they step out into the public eye. And even when I mean, maybe I'm just weird, but I walked past the festival hall the other night and it was all done up in blue and yellow colours. And, you kind of think, enough already, we understand that it's a terrible thing. We understand that the Russians are doing a bad thing. Do we really have to be bombarded constantly with the Ukrainian flag everywhere we go?
Well, probably we do, and I suppose the person we have to blame for that is Mr. Vladimir Putin, who has indeed turned Ukraine into a martyr state, and there we are. I think that. Do
you think he thought about that?
Well, as I say, I think he took leave of his senses when he launched this invasion, which was both stupid and wrong, and not just a crime, but a mistake. I think that at the moment those people who are trying to advise him and get close to him at the summit of Russian politics are almost certainly begging him to find some way of climbing down from what they can clearly see as a catastrophe for Russia and the Russian people and for the world. But whether they'll be able to do so, we have yet to see. There are faintly encouraging signs that some sort of serious negotiation is beginning to take place between Ukraine and Russia, and I think that's the absolutely essential first step towards bringing about peace, so that innocent people aren't being carved to bits by flying hunks of metal and burning chunks of explosive, which is what's going on at the moment, and which, to my mind, we have to stop as soon as possible. And everybody has to swallow pride and swallow passion in that cause, because any of us who've seen a human head that a bullet has passed through, it doesn't want to ever see it again or imagine that it's going on, or they're terrible. I accidentally saw yesterday an appalling photograph of the injuries to one Ukrainian civilian. The thing just makes you blench. The idea that this is happening hundreds of times a day is almost unbearable. It has to stop. So therefore, those things which will help it to stop, are things which any civilized person must support, and there will have to be some pride swallowing on both sides to enable that to happen. Well, too bad.
Yes, indeed. And as far as your description of Russia in your piece yesterday, you talked about how it's not as strong as people perhaps thought that it would be.
No.
Is this the kind of final, I mean, I don't want to say death rattle, but is it the sort of the final ending, if you like, of the pre-Soviet era? You know, the fact that Vladimir Putin came along post-Gorbachev, post sort of Glasnost, and was supposedly going to be different, but then kind of went back to his old ways and became back to the kind of KGB colonel that he always was, but kind of now is not working very well.
Well, that's not why. It's a long and difficult story. I'm currently reading Angus Roxburgh's superb biography of Putin, which I think everybody should read who wants a good and balanced account of the man, and of the extraordinary deterioration of him and of his politics, and of course of Russia at his hands, since he initially took over, as somebody who people place some hopes. I don't think it's much to do with the KGB. I think it has, to some extent, it has to do with the fact that Russia has not, since the great election of 1917, which Lenin cancelled with bayonets, has not really had much experience of freedom or the rule of law. And it also has a lot to do with the fact that Russia has always felt, with some reason, so threatened. But in my view, the recent developments are partly the fruit of very foolish Western policies of cornering Russia and building an anti-Russian alliance on Russian borders, which was never going to end well. But I think that it has now reached a stage where the very existence of Russia itself as a major country is threatened. This is a country where more people die each year than are born. It's in many ways desperate. You get out of the glitter of Moscow into the smaller provincial cities, and many of them are still devastated by three-quarters of a century of communism, and there is no proper industry. The level of corruption, this is also true of Ukraine, by the way, the level of corruption is astonishing and appalling and makes almost everything impossible. The question asked, quite rightly, why is it, after China was communist for many years, yet you can't move around the world for products made in China, which we all happily buy? Have you ever anywhere seen a product made in Russia?
No.
Or
no.
Be tempted to buy one, apart perhaps from a bottle of vodka? There really isn't anything that they make.
No.
Apart from weapons, they just extract stuff from the ground and sell it. And it has never developed since the collapse of communism into a civilized, properly functioning economy. And I think the whole existence of the country is now under threat. There's no countries do come to an end. And Lithuania was once a great power. So is Sweden. And they shrink or they entirely disappear. And I think this fate is perfectly possible for Russia if it carries on behaving in this fashion.
Yeah, I mean, I heard an American commentator last week describing Russia as a gas station with nuclear weapons, which is not entirely wrong. Also, I was told, and I don't know if you can confirm this, that an awful lot and the vast majority of the Russian population don't actually live in cities. And so they're mostly in rural settings where money is very much in short supply, and much of it is in cash. And so actually the idea that these, sort of MasterCard, Visa type sanctions are ruining and crippling the country might not be the case.
Well, I don't know. I have to say I have to see the statistics to back that up. It might be. I'd never have thought that. My experience of Russia being mostly urban, when you went to the countryside, you often find almost semi-deserted villages with several drunk people slowly dying in them.
Right.
It never struck me as a predominantly rural country, but I'm always willing to listen to statistics. But what is certainly the case is that Russians have often survived through very bad periods, because most of them have always had small country, they're really shacks rather than cottages and patches of land on which they've grown enough to eat. And this has been very important actually in the past 30 years to many people who have lost jobs and have lost pensions and have had to live pretty much on their own subsistence. But I'd have to stand back and say I need to look that up before agreeing or disagreeing with
yes,
that.
I haven't checked it out. It was just a conversation I was having at the weekend. So, I mean, from what you're seeing at the moment, and in the terms that we always speak once a week, are we closer, do you think, to some kind of resolution to this week than we were last week?
Well, I think inevitably we're closer to it because it will end.
Yeah.
It has to end for everybody's sake. It's just a question of how long people will maintain their pride and their stupidity on one side and their what you might call a courageous determination on the other. But the fact is that there has to come a moment where the fighting has to stop, and we're getting closer to it. But how much closer, I don't know. There could be an incident of a terrible kind at any point in the next couple of days, which would derail any negotiations. As I say, it's incredibly hard to end wars once they've started. It's one of the 5 million reasons why people should never start them in the first place.
Yes, exactly right. And in terms of the way that that you're seeing the West kind of dealing with it all, do you see that continuing as it is in terms of the policy?
I'm not sure quite what the Western countries think they're up to. Obviously, we will find out afterwards when all the books are written just how many weapons Western countries have been sending into Ukraine and how much they've been trading Ukrainian armed forces, which has obviously had a huge impact on the way the war has turned out and has shown. This is the point I made yesterday in my Mail on Sunday column, has shown that Russia is not actually that strong, that its army is not that good, that we have believed for a long time in a bogeyman, which turns out not to be justified. I'm not saying they're not capable of destroying, but they don't seem to me to be capable of taking ground, let alone a country, on the sort of scale which would make them a serious military power. I think that one of the things which Putin has achieved has shown that his country is a second-rate military power with a not very good army, which has not been capable of fulfilling its objectives, which is an interesting lesson for everybody, not just for Russia and for Putin and his muscle flexing, but also for all those who have claimed for so long that Russia is so great a threat to all its neighbours. Well, is it really? If this is the best it can do, I think perhaps not.
Well, I suppose people in Ukraine might disagree with you, and they'd probably say, actually, it's pretty awful.
Well, I'm not saying it's not awful. I'm saying, but if all you can do is burst illegally into your neighbour's country and destroy, but you can't actually take and hold ground, and you can't control the land into which you have burst, then that isn't really a power which is big enough to be a menace to all its neighbours. Having failed on this occasion, which I think it's fair to say it looks as if Russia has done, having failed on this occasion, how much of a threat is it to anybody else in future? And I think that the idea that it was or is a major first-rate conventional military power seems to me to have been gravely damaged by these events.
Yes, no, I think so, and certainly its military will be quite substantially reduced after it all as well, because they'll have lost so many tanks and so much weaponry into the bargain. Let's talk about something else you wrote about the weekend. The cannabis debate rages on. There's another Home Affairs Select Committee inquiry being set up into marijuana, which, as you say, will no doubt result in probably the decriminalisation further of its use.
Well, it's interesting. You go through. This is the third time, I think, in 20 years that the Home Affairs Committee has held one of these inquiries, and it's wonderful the way they always come up with the same answer. I did actually give evidence to the last one, and I might as well, frankly, have jumped up and down on the table in front of them, pulling my trousers up and down for all the good it did. They paid absolutely no attention to anything that I said, and just came out with the usual decriminalisation boilerplate. That what we need to do about drugs is to soften the whatever campaign against people using them we've had up till now. I confidently expect that this select committee will behave in the same way, because that's the way thinking fashion goes. It is extraordinary, in I don't know what 20 years of trying to campaign on this and pointing out actually marijuana is not a soft drug. The people who take it often become mentally ill, and some of those who become mentally ill also become violent. That legalizing it does not get rid of gangs. On the contrary, they continue to exist and have done in Canada and Colorado after legalization. That all the cases made for it are feeble. A tiny part of that has sunk into the public consciousness. Occasionally, I notice other people in the media are seeing these things. But in general, the view particularly of the major media and the leader writers and members of parliament, and I suspect civil servants, is the same, that there has been a war on drugs which has failed when there has been no war on drugs, so it couldn't have failed, and that therefore we should get rid of practically all the remaining restrictions. And there may be a miracle. Maybe this Home Affairs Select Committee will finally look at the evidence from places like South Korea and Japan, where enforcing laws against drug possession have resulted in lowered use, and maybe they'll pay some attention to that fact, in which case I shall be rejoicing. But as it is, it seems to me that fashion is going the other way, and there's been an extraordinarily successful public relations campaign for drug legalization, particularly for marijuana, over the past 50 years, and it's still working.
Well, there's an awful lot of people, and many of them are in government in the US now, local government, if not national government, making a great deal of money from taxing it, aren't they?
Well, that is, of course, one of the attractions of its politicians of all parties. Here is another, the thing which politicians love are the things called sin taxes. If you tax something which people really like doing, they don't stop doing it unless you tax it really heavily. They carry on paying the taxes. This is one of the reasons why it took so long to take serious action against cigarettes. Yeah. Because governments were making so much tax revenue out of tobacco that they were reluctant, I think, to destroy it. No one ever said that, but it seemed to me if you look at the gap between the discovery that cigarettes killed you and governments doing anything serious to stop people smoking, then what other explanation is there? Yeah. But here is another sin tax going, and governments frantically need money at the moment. They've run out of ways of squeezing it out of us, and here is one. So there is a certain cynicism going on here. The problem with that, of course, is it is exactly what undermines the claim that legalizing drugs will remove criminal gangs from the drug business. If you tax a legalized drug, then and regulate it, then those who can sell you the drug without you having to pay the tax, and also who can ignore the regulations, will very definitely stay in business, as they have done in Colorado and in Canada and many other places where this thing has been attempted. Well, it's so much rubbish who's talked about this. It's almost beyond belief.
I mean, the other problem they've got in certainly southwestern states of America is that many of the marijuana growers who don't any longer grow it because it's not worth doing in sort of Central America are manufacturing this stuff which is sort of synthetic heroin, which is a far more dangerous drug, far easier to transport and far more profitable now for them because there's no point in them growing marijuana anymore.
Well, I challenge the far more dangerous because personally I think that lifelong incurable mental illness is a horrendous and huge danger, and the dangers of marijuana should never, ever be underestimated. And I say this doesn't happen to everyone who smokes marijuana, but the number of cases. And I, again, recommend people to go to this website, Attacker Smoke Cannabis, where the author studies and goes through local newspaper reports of crimes in which the perpetrator was a long-term marijuana user. It's horrifying how many crimes are being committed by users of this allegedly peaceful drug. And it bursts into families, as it did in the case I reported on the weekend. It's a young man, well, not that young, actually, who's now admitted the manslaughter of his mother. And she said that the day before, when he'd attacked her and the police were called and he was carted off, she said it was marijuana that was causing this. But nobody pays any attention. The following day, she was stabbed to death. But nothing. No one ever draws any conclusions from this. And I often look into these crimes where it's not stated that marijuana is involved, and the police won't even discuss it because they're so embarrassed about the fact that they've given up actually enforcing the law against marijuana possession. And some of them may be beginning to realise that this was a grave mistake.
Good talk.
Hot talk. Bold talk. Talk radio.
Listen on your smart speaker.
Watch it live on your smart TV. The world headquarters of common sense.
Talk radio.